A couple of days ago, a YouTube user, nothingmemorable, left a comment on my video, Critical Thinking of the Bible #3, Mosaic Justice. I responded to that comment, and today he made, looks like 6 rather long text comments to my response. I'm really not enthusiastic about trying to go back and answer all of these in text, and it could become confusing. So I invited him, not long ago, an hour ago, to actually make a video response saying stuff. But honestly, I suspect if he were going to do that, he already would have done it. So what I am going to do, because I don't want to just leave these comments sitting there unanswered, I am going to read them off, and then I'm going to give my response. So nothing memorable, you can come back and view this video, and I will be answering your comments. The first comment he made a couple of days ago, he said, "And how many experts on Jewish law, i.e. rabbis, agree with your exegesis on these two matters? One demand of critical thinking is that you consult with the experts on such matters, but you obviously haven't. For your information, the rapist would be subjected to the death penalty. As for the Sabbath law, Moses never defined work, but the context makes it clear that it was about commerce and food gathering. In any event, the violator could always obtain immediate absolution through the penitential system of Leviticus." My initial response to him was to nothing memorable. "Don't worry, you're not the first person to completely incorrectly argue this. The man would receive capital punishment only if the victim is married or engaged. If she's not, as the teenager in the example, then she is forced to marry her rapist. Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29. On the second point, anyone doing any work was to be stoned to death. Exodus 31:14, including a man who was found to be gathering sticks, Numbers 15:32 through 35. This does not apply only to commerce or food gathering." Okay, so this is where his responses to my last response begin. And I'm going to stop periodically and respond to them. This video is probably going to be kind of long. I'm probably going to have to cut it into multiple parts. But anyway, here he goes. He starts out, "Nathan, you're definitely not acquainted with the nature of biblical law. The word law is probably not the best translation for Torah, especially if one thinks it implies something like what we think of as a civil law code. It's not a civil code, nor does each law spell out the details of a particular case. When we read Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 through 29, we must compare it with other passages to get the whole picture. Otherwise, one's interpretation can only be superficial or misconstrued." We can compare the Mosaic law to laws today, like you're saying. It's not. Laws today will spell out, criminal laws will spell out an act which is forbidden. In this case, the Mosaic law spelled out an act which was forbidden, work on the Sabbath. Criminal laws will generally give some guidelines as to punishment. The law in the Bible gives the guideline of punishment of the death penalty for working on the Sabbath. Calling it a Torah rather than a law doesn't change what it is. You know the old quote, "arose by any other name." Well, a law by any other name is still a law. And by reading the law, just reading the law, you can tell its writers intended it to be a law. The Bible even gives examples, as I mentioned to you, of the man who was supposedly executed for collecting sticks. The Bible gives examples of people who committed the offenses the Mosaic law lists and received the punishments prescribed in the law. So I stick with my definition of the Mosaic law as a law. Whether you want to call it a Torah or not is fine. In his next comment, he says, Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 through 29 recapitulates Exodus 22:16. The act in both is not rape as understood now, but consensual sex, seduction, statutory and date rape as committed by the horny teenager who just won't take no for an answer. The Hebrew phrase translated as rape in the New International Version is different than that used in verse 25. In 25, the key word shazak means force seizably brutally. In 28, the word thefas, meaning manipulate, and also abscond with, misappropriate, use without the father's authorization. If you would classify date rape as not being really rape, I think that says a lot more about you than it does about the definition of the scripture. But on to other points. Your point about the different words is actually interesting. Looking at the passage we're discussing, in Deuteronomy 22 and verse 25, it seems, just to me, from reading it casually, it seems there's a pretty obvious reason why it would use different words. In 25 it says, "But if out in the country a man happens to meet a girl pledged to be married and rapes her, only the man who has done this shall die. Do nothing to the girl, she has committed no sin deserving death. This case is like that of someone who attacks and murders his neighbor. For the man found the girl out in the country, and the betrothed girl screamed. There was no one to rescue her." This isn't so much differentiating technically between different kinds of rapes as it is between different kinds of victims. In this case specifically, if the victim were a victim not of a forcible rape, but of some other kind of coercion, a coercive rape, if she were too afraid to fight back, or if she were seduced, as you imply, if she somehow relented or even consented, then she would die too. So this is stating explicitly that if the rape is forcible and is in the country, and therefore no one could help the woman as she's being raped, then he's to be killed, but she's not to be killed. It's differentiating between types of victims. In verses 28 and 29, it says, "If a man happens to meet a virgin who is not pledged to be married and rapes her, and they are discovered, he shall pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver. He must marry the girl, for he violated her. He can never divorce her as long as he lives." In this case, it doesn't matter if the girl consented or not. As you say, the word could mean that she is seduced. It could mean that she is absconded with, which sounds to me like if he's absconding with a girl, if he's coercing her in some way, then that's still rape. And in this case, it would include cases where the girl consented or at least didn't fight back. If it had used the same word as it uses in verse 25, then that would mean only the virgin who was forcibly raped would have to marry the attacker. In this case, it's including virgins who are, at least it seems to me, it's including virgins who are forcibly raped, or who may not be forcibly raped, but maybe they just don't resist very hard. They don't scream because they don't really mind, even though they've said no, or whatever the case. Maybe they're too afraid to scream. Maybe they're in shock, so they don't scream. But it's including a wider array of actions, it seems to me, in the latter verse. But that is an interesting point you make about it using different words.